rapidly growing,
non-native tree species,
consuming,
alien tree species,
adapting,
exotic species.
they conquer.
Forest fire. Education is very important.
Invasive species.
Strong bark beetle attack.
Risk,
Alien or a non-native.
resistance, heat, timber market, ecosystem services, recreational use, pests,
Jeopardizing local economies.
perception, public biodiversity, urban trees, resilience, future, climate change, global change.
And devastating entire ecosystems.
We are talking about ALPTREES. That's an Interreg Alpine Space funded project.
Welcome to the 7th episode of our ALPTREES podcast series. It's Tuesday, 7th of September 2021, and today we will talk about the transnational strategy on non-native tree species in the Alpine Space, a strategy that was developed as a key output in the Interreg project ALPTREES. We are glad to introduce a lineup of experts from various regions in the Alpine Space who worked as our partners and colleagues on this strategy over the last month. May I introduce our partners, Alexander Marinček from the Slovenian Forestry Institute, Anja Bindewald from the Forest Research Institute, Baden-Württemberg in Germany.
Hello, everyone.
Florian Kraxner from the International Institute for Applied System Analysis, IASA in Austria.
Hello, welcome.
And Rinima Hazarika from the Federal Research and Training Center for Forests, Natural Hazards and Landscape at the BFW in Austria.
Hi, hello.
And the ALPTREES lead partner, Katharina Lapin, also from the BFW Vienna. Katharina, why does the Alpine Space need a transnational strategy on non-native trees?
In our project, we discovered the uses and the management of non-native tree species in the Alpine Space, and we found that it's quite a patchy landscape of recommendations, legislations, and ways how non-native tree species are perceived. And often this message is very simplified. And with this strategy, we hope to support to unify the management and also the sustainable use of non-native tree species, because we found out that not all non-native tree species are necessarily good or bad, that you have to be very specific on different tree species. And we hope that we provide with this strategy and guidance for the future development of use cases of non-native tree species in the Alpine Space. And the strategy is built up in 5 goals. And first of all the goals, of course, underline kind of key principles, I would say. And this is to share the knowledge. So any knowledge which is continuously accumulated on non-native tree species should be open and accessible to stakeholders, to the public. We have another principle is to respect ownerships and legislation and any legal duties and rights regarding the use of non-native tree species in the area. And then, of course, to have the communication and the decisions very evidence-based and to have a clear communication. So those are the 3 principles which underline 5 goals. And the first goal is achieving sustainability. And I think, Florian, that's all your topic, sustainable use of forests. Maybe you can go into this first one.
Yeah, thank you, Katharina. Well, we know in the meantime, and we feel in the meantime, and we can also see it, that climate change has also a very strong impact on our forests, particularly in the Alpine Space. So if we are on the highway in our cars, or if we are hiking in the nature, we see that some trees are clearly in trouble. And we, with this project, try to support our forests in the Alpine Space in order to stay healthy and to form a sustainable ecosystem. So what can we do in order to live up to sustainability in the forest area when our traditional and native tree species are in trouble? And what we can do as a scientist is to do more and more research to see how can we help these trees by changing management, and also to look into substituting some of these species and try to still maintain a healthy and sustainable forest. So non-native trees and tree species are an option to substitute parts of or some special species of our native tree species society here. And this is, of course, not possible to do it at large scale, but in smaller plots and in smaller locations. These kind of trials are already ongoing, and these are more or less successful. Our highest goal is still to maintain sustainability.
Florian, you have dedicated so many years of your research career on finding solutions on how to mitigate and adapt to climate change, and especially to find solutions for the sustainable forest management. Why is sustainability so important for the strategy of non-native tree species?
Yeah, thank you, Katharina. So just an example, it's autumn now, we should be out there hiking in the mountains, in the forest actually, and we will notice that not only the broadleaf trees change their colors, but we will also see that some trees are really in trouble. Let's just take as an example our most famous tree, spruce. We will see that the climate and the changing climate has a negative impact on this native tree species. And now we are looking for a strategy. What should we do here? Should we continue planting spruce everywhere? Or do we have to help the forest ecosystem in order to maintain its multiple objectives, for instance, to fight against the climate change through mitigation? Can we do this still in all the places with spruce trees, or do we have to assist here with other native tree species or even with non-native tree species in order to maintain a sustainable ecosystem in our forests? And we are trying to find out in which locations non-native tree species can potentially substitute or be added to tree species like spruce in order to maintain this sustainability, also in terms of contributing to the United Nations sustainability goals like fighting climate change or maintain good life on land.
Wow, that sounds very complex. So what's the recommendation from this goal?
Well, I would first of all recommend that we really look on a scientific basis into all the diverse tree species that we have at hand and try to find an optimal composition of our trees, mostly based on native trees. But if not possible with native trees, we have to also look into non-native trees that can be promoted in certain locations. Another recommendation would really to look also into the benefits and risks that come along here and do even more research in order to make wise decisions in order to also maintain a healthy forest in our Alps in the future.
Thank you, Florian. In the strategy, we propose like very clear recommendations on how to deal with non-natives in order to support the sustainable development of this region. If I may, I will maybe say one or two. Like one, for example, is also to safeguard the diversity of native tree species where it's reasonable, where it's useful. And from our study, we know that non-native tree species are a fundamental part of developing also urban green space. So it's kind of a tricky and complicated also message we are transporting in our project based on the results, is that non-native tree species in some areas can really have beneficials for our development, or in some areas there really are risks to ecosystem services. And that leads me quite nicely to the second goal, to reduce the escape and invasion risk of those non-native tree species which potentially could have a negative impact on the ecosystem services and the biodiversity of the alpine space. And maybe Anja, can you explain what invasiveness is and why we should talk about it?
Yeah, thank you, Katharina. I think actually it's one of the first things which are really important is to define the invasiveness so that we are all on the same line. We're all talking about the same topic. And so the risk of a non-native tree species to be or to become invasive can be defined as the likelihood and the magnitude of negative impacts which may be associated with its introduction, establishment, and spread. And such risks could, for example, involve that a non-native tree species competes with native tree species. It may hybridize with native congeneric tree species. It may change ecosystem functions, and it may also introduce new pathogens and pests. And also what we also consider as an invasive species, particularly in urban areas, that there's also a risk that a non-native tree species cause allergies in humans.
Thank you. Anja, but what are recommendations in the strategy for how to deal with those potentially invasive non-native tree species?
So actually, it's not possible to provide like really general recommendations to deal with potentially invasive non-native tree species. We have to be like really specific. So whether a non-native tree species becomes invasive depends first of all on its species-specific characteristics and its ecological behavior, but it also depends on humans who are cultivating the non-native tree species, and of course it also depends on the local site conditions. So therefore the invasiveness of a specific non-native tree species can vary between different regions and ecosystems of the alpine space, and of course it can also change over time. And in addition, also humans can mitigate these risks. And so to reduce the risk of a non-native tree species and to manage the species responsibly, it is necessary to communicate precisely about the site-specific risks which may develop, and also precisely on the tree species specific characteristics.
So one of the major recommendations is to facilitate or to conduct a site-specific risk assessment. And in the project ALPTREES, Anja led a fantastic work on how to deal with site-specific risks of each species individually. Perhaps there will be a second podcast on this topic, but Anja, could you maybe briefly explain what the site-specific risk assessment contains?
Yeah, the site-specific risk assessment is actually a new approach which we developed during the project. And what is really new about this approach is that you should assess the risks for different sites. So the final outcome is not to provide one risk category, which is, for example, potentially invasive species or invasive species, but to provide really clear and specific information on the different sites which may be threatened by the non-native tree species. And also, which is quite new in this approach, is that we consider the local site conditions and the regional context. And if, for example, it's possible in a specific regional context to mitigate the risks of a non-native tree species, it may still be used even though it is considered invasive in another region, for example. So one of the major important parts is really also to include the existing management options to control the risks of a potentially invasive non-native tree species.
Thank you, Anja, for explaining what invasiveness is and what's the risk of using a potentially invasive non-native tree species and why we should proceed with our decisions in a site-specific way. So what is the goal of goal number 2?
So the major second goal of the strategy is to reduce the risks of a non-native tree species to be or become invasive. So for example, to reduce the risks of a non-native tree species to escape from cultivation sites into areas of high conservation value. And actually to maximize the potential benefits of using non-native tree species, for example, in terms of climate change adaptation, while minimizing their potential risks, remains a key challenge also for the strategy. And so based on site-specific risk assessment, which we recommend to use within the strategy, we are able to distinguish between the risks posed by non-native tree species at different sites, locations, and ecosystem types. And therefore, it's possible to manage non-native tree species responsibly. And so our major recommendation is to promote only those non-native tree species of which the risk assessment results have shown that it either does currently not pose any risks, or the risks can be controlled, and effective management measures are in place to control or exclude such risks.
Thank you. Sounds like a very systematic approach, and it should certainly help to identify those species which are risky from those who might be beneficial in a certain area. Still, non-native tree species are widely discussed as an option to improve the resilience of forests and also urban green space, especially in climate change. That's why the third goal of the strategy is to improve the resilience of natural and urban forests and urban green space to climate change. And we proposed in the strategy an approach on how to decide which tree species should be used and managed. And perhaps, Renee, you worked on this quite a while. Can you add on some recommendations which we defined in the strategy?
Yes, thank you, Katarina. Yeah, there are several processes that can be adopted to increase the resilience of the existing forest. I mean natural forest or the urban peri-urban forest patches. By increasing resilience, we mean that the forest continues to provide the ecosystem services as usual. The processes now can be summarized into two categories of management, that is passive and active management. Passive management refers to the allowing nature to take its course, that is without intervention, without human intervention. However, this strategy has been strongly criticized in Europe because Europe rarely have old natural forests. Because the current status of forest stands in Europe is the result of the legacies of the past management. So therefore, active management is very important. It comes out to be important. And in the active management, we can implement, again, a lot of different strategies, out of which 3 strategies are very important. Number 1, we can utilize new provenances and genotypes of the same species, which we can also say assisted migration, or most appropriately assisted population migration. For example, from Calabria region in Italy, we can bring in provenances of silver fir and plant it in Central Europe.
Okay, so therefore active management is very important, and in the active management there are different strategies to be followed, which is followed in forestry, but the 3 main strategies that can be implemented or is implemented is number 1, utilizing new provenances and genotypes of the same species, which is assisted population migration. Like, for example, the Calabriaceae provenances, that is provenances of silver fir from Calabria, bringing them and planting them in Central Europe. So and this again is all using native tree species, that is. And on the on the other hand, the second strategy, which is very widely followed, is the And as Florian has also mentioned, like planting mixture of different native tree species, which is again assisted species migration, which we can say. This is to distribute the risk of climate change in a way, to plant different species in the same location. The second strategy, which is very widely used, is planting a mixture of different native tree species in the same location. That is assisted species migration, where, for example, we are increasing the share of broad-leaved tree species in Norway spruce monoculture. So this is an example of this mixed cultivation. So these two are broadly used in forestry, but in case these two strategies fail, then we have a third strategy, which is to use the non-native tree species in order to restore the ecosystem services. But using non-native tree species is not very easy. There are lots of challenges and risks, as Anya has already mentioned, and most notably are the invasive potential, the negative impact on the native biodiversity, and additionally, the climate change predictions are to be taken into consideration while selecting the non-native tree species, because there are lots of models, climate models, which have given a lot of predictions and climate scenarios, but there are still to be a concrete decision on there are lots of uncertainties in these models. So looking into these uncertainties, we need to have a concrete decision, because without a concrete decision on the choice of plants, we cannot choose which plants do we, which trees do we plant for under the future climate condition. If these two strategies fail to restore the ecosystem services, and then we think about the non-native tree species. Then the non-native tree species comes into the picture. But we must also pay attention that the planting non-native tree species is not a very easy decision, because it has its own risks and challenges, as Anya has already mentioned. Most notably, the potential invasiveness. Secondly, the negative effect on native biodiversity. Also on the soil ecosystems, when we think about increasing our forest cover or canopy cover, like in order to follow processes like the SDG goal number 15, we think about increasing the forest cover, and we plant a lot of non-native tree species, which has the potential of growing faster. But we maybe for some non-native tree species, we don't think about the soil ecosystem. What the aim is to carbon sequestration by planting a lot of trees. But and these trees, some of the non-native trees, also die and decompose faster, leading the soil to release the carbon back into the atmosphere. So thus deleting the very aim of for climate change mitigation. So this is these are some of the very risks. These are some of the risks and challenges that we encounter in non-native trees. In addition to this, the uncertainties of the climate change prediction, that is the different models predicting different climate change scenarios and uncertainties. Therefore, a proper decision making is not happening, because if we don't know the future climate conditions, if we don't have concrete evidence of what our future climate predictions will be, then we cannot decide what species to plant, which will sync with the future climate conditions. And therefore, all the knowledge which is scattered in the regional or country specific policies or processes should come together to form a concrete framework for the use and getting the benefits of non-native tree species. And this transnational consultation is a small part from ALPTREES towards such a big decision making, and therefore it is very important. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Renee. It shows that there's a lot of research going on non-native tree species, which has been in this project ALPTREES, like significantly influencing our activities and the discussions with all the stakeholders. And within all the process and activities in ALPTREES, we found out that there is so many people working with non-native tree species, and there is a lot of sectors involved. And it's really a diverse group of experts, practitioners, and also just simply the public. Each of you who is planting a non-native tree species in the garden is kind of part of this strategy as well. Our next goal is targeting to improve the cooperation, the capacity building, and also to share the expertise on non-native tree species for all the sectors. And Alexander, you have been working so closely with so many practitioners, and you have produced a lot of tools to transfer the knowledge from research into the practice and to open a discussion with stakeholders. What was your experience during this work in ALPTREES with these sectors?
Yes, we found out that non-native trees are with us for decades, and to be more precise, they are with us more than a few centuries. And therefore, the science society has a lot of knowledge and a lot of data which are available, and new data and new knowledge is available every day. So on the other side, we have a lot of knowledge. On the other side, we have different stakeholders which are very interested in non-native tree species, especially non-native tree species in the Alpine Space. So they deserve to be informed. They deserve to get information, or just maybe informations and guidelines, what to do, what is our future. Please, scientists, tell us what to do in the next 30, 40, 50 years. So if we want to spread our knowledge, our guidelines, and things like that, we need to improve our cooperations, capacity building, and also expertise sharing. So till now, the research and training activities in the Alpine Space have been very inconsistent till now, especially regarding using non-native trees. So therefore, this inconsistent places the Alpine Space at a disadvantage, especially in terms of dealing with climate change and being in a positive position to influence policy. We need to influence policy at EU level, otherwise our work will not be done 100%. So the goal, our goal in Alpine Space should be to fill the gap in the lack of coordination of the activities, especially on the management of non-native trees in different regions and the countries, also with different stakeholders. And also we need to communicate. We need to improve communications among stakeholders, where in the forest and horticultural sector, urban greening sector, and so on. So our recommendations to improve all those capacity building, expertise sharing is to ensure close cross-sector cooperation and also exchange of expertise in the field of forestry, horticulture, urban greening, etc. We need to enable cross-border trade and utilization of forest reproductive material, which will full respect to OECD regulations. So forest reproductive material is very important. Without it, without the preparation of it, we cannot build our future forests. So we also need to develop and maintain networks which will provide and exchange information in the distribution, management, and use cases of non-native trees. And with this action, we can ensure the free and user-friendly access. We are building information hub, which will be at the end will be our final product of the ALPTREES project, where in one place you can get all the informations we were able to gather. We need to invest in transnational research activities. Why? To identify suitable tree species and their long-term management and access to the adaptation potential of non-native. And also at the same time, we should think about, primarily we should think about native trees in the Alpine space. Although genetic science could serve us as a proper methods. And at last, we should create and maintain a best practice database in order to fit information into non-native tree management manuals for practitioners. And this would be our books, which we are preparing in the Alpine Trees project.
Thank you, Alexander. I think what we have to emphasize here in this discussion also is that the knowledge which we created in this project, and which is maybe also created by other colleagues outside of this project, working on those different cross-sectoral solutions for the use of non-native tree species, need to be updated from time to time. So we have to keep on researching and communicating and sharing the knowledge. And also beyond this project, the Knowledge Hub, for example, is just one possibility how we could proceed from there. And we are happy to continue working on the best practices on non-native tree species and also native tree species, which certainly could also be part of the solution when mitigating or adapting to climate change. So, Alexander, what was your favorite experience from the project?
My favorite experience was that we were able to put the data of the whole Alpine Space region and to see what we have in our forests, what we have in our towns. And I was really surprised that our counting of non-native trees in the urban and forest area reached the number of more than 500 non-native tree species. That is
absolutely. That also shocked me in the first place when we saw that the numbers are that high, that we have so many different families and genuses from very different origins. And Anya, this is all has been a lot of effort how to collect the data on non-native tree species in the Alpine space. Perhaps you found some difficulties on how to gather this data and how to put this data together, because of course in the strategy we always emphasize an evidence-based communication, and data on non-native tree species are so important to see where the trees are used. So what were, in your experience from the project, what were the difficulties you had in the data collection, and what are you very proud of?
So actually, yes, it was really difficult to collect the data, which is in some part also related to the fact that non-native tree species are not continuously monitored in every country. And so, for example, in national forest inventories, often only the most important, often the economically most important non-native tree species are monitored, but rather the rare tree species. And so this is like the first issue that we were dealing with. And but actually what was really useful for this data collection was to go into more detail with the urban tree data cadastre sets. So in cities, they often monitor all tree species growing in the urban green infrastructure places. And so this data was really suitable to improve our knowledge on non-native tree species growing, especially in urban areas, because they really have this detailed data. Not all the cities have such a data, but actually most of the cities were providing us with data. And So this was really useful for our data collection.
For data collection, we also used the help of the citizens of the Alpine Space. And that certainly was a great experience, especially during the pandemic, where we had so little contact in person, but we still managed kind of to bring our message to a lot of citizens who supported us in the collection of data. And perhaps, Florian, you want to share some experiences from the data collection with citizens, and also how you will proceed with this data collection from now on, because the project is still ongoing for some couple of months, and some great data management and data analysis tools will be used to project the use of non-native tree species in future, or let's say the use cases.
Yes, thank you, Katharina. At IASA, we do so-called suitability mapping for different tree species. So that means we have to identify which of the native and non-native trees grow best at which places and where they can contribute best to the forest ecosystem. And that it is very difficult to get data to feed our models, Anja has already impressively explained. So what we did is that we so to say, activated the crowd meaning the public, everybody, and through an online platform called iNaturalist, we collected data on non-native tree species in order to improve our suitability modeling, in order to, again, help to create and maintain sustainable forest ecosystems. On this platform, everybody could participate, take pictures of identified non-native tree species and mark the geo-referenced location. And so we could pick this up from the app and include it into our models. And this activity was great and is great for instance, schools who go out into the forest and get explained the different tree species. And they are super happy to identify non-native tree species and let us know through the app. There are even competitions. And this collection of scientific data through the crowd is still ongoing.
We could see through this exercise how important it is to communicate with the public, and how also to reach out to the public and to their knowledge, and to increase the awareness of non-native tree species. And we used a lot of different communication tools to reach a lot of different target groups. Petra, what is your experience from the ALPTREES project, and why do we need the goal number 5, which is called increased communication, citizen science awareness and involvement?
Yeah, thank you, Katharina. It's because citizens' awareness and involvement are important for the management and sustainable use of non-native tree species. So the goal of the communication in the transnational strategy is to give all citizens equal access to the latest information on non-native tree species. So no matter which background someone comes from, everyone should be able to get access to this knowledge by overcoming barriers of language, barriers of social descent, age, or digital divide. When communicating with the public, it is crucial that we in our communication in ALPTREES always refer to species-specific and site-specific information to avoid generalization. To give you a picture, one non-native tree species may be invasive under certain circumstances and in certain habitats, but this species may not act invasive in other areas of the Alpine space. So it is our aim to help the general public to understand the complexity of this topic. Also to understand the difference between invasive and non-invasive tree species, or tree species where the risks are not known yet. Again, with the goal to get rid of generalizations that until now shaped the opinion of the public towards the often emotional-driven topic on non-native trees. In addition, we support education initiatives at all levels, from schools, universities to stakeholder organizations. And therefore, all relevant project results have to be translated to local languages, guidance and training material, as well as policy documents. Always in mind that people from all walks of life can participate and benefit from the ALPTREES strategy that aims to help regional, national, and local policymakers and forest owners and public authorities, urban planners, regional agencies and NGOs to unify their government's strategies and to enable all citizens to participate actively in the development and implementation of transnational policies on non-native trees.
We provided in the strategy also a guidance how to implement the strategy. And first of all, we want to invite everybody to comment and to criticize and to give us a feedback on the strategy within a public consultation. So this strategy draft, the first version, is online, and everybody is invited to give us a feedback on how to improve the strategy and make it more usable. So those listeners who are joining us to listen to this podcast before the 15th of October 2021 have an opportunity also online to give us a feedback before we really release the last version of it. The implementation plan we have designed for the implementation of the strategy on non-native tree species is structured in 3 stages, which could guide us within the next 10 years to improve the use of non-native tree species and to re-evaluate also the way how we have managed non-native tree species in the past and adjust the strategy, of course, when new knowledge and new evidence has been created. So all this is based on a very strong communication between different stakeholders and target groups. Thank you very much for this fantastic discussion on native tree species. And it was a pleasure talking to you, but it was also a great pleasure working with you and to discover how much passion you have about this topic of non-native tree species, which definitely was one of the best experience I had in the ALPTREES project. So as we have reached the end of the podcast, I'll ask you maybe for your final statement on how you experienced the work in the project and what needs to be done next to really implement the strategy, or what's your wish for the future? Maybe Anja, you want to give a start?
Yes, so I think such a project is really great to collect a lot of data. So it's really promising that different project partners from different countries work together, and such cooperation actually allows to gather data on the risks and on the benefits of non-native tree species. And I think we should keep on this and collaborate internationally in the future to improve our knowledge on the risks and also on the promising non-native tree species in the Alpine space and also across whole Europe, of course.
Alexander, what is your big hopes for the future when thinking about non-native tree species?
Okay, my recommendation or a final statement is that native tree species first. But on the other hand, we found out that we have a very big pool of different non-native tree species in Alpine space, and understandable the spread of non-native tree species is fraught with hope, skepticism, or also rejection of some people. We are aware that non-native trees could be a part of solution in climate change situation that we are now, but also could bring negative and positive aspects. But if we have a good transnational strategy for the management and responsible use of non-native trees, which is one of the main objectives that we want to achieve in the ALPTREES project and spread it, share it with other people, other countries, this could lead us to a sustainable and unharmful coexistence with numerous non-native tree species.
In regard to climate change, Florian, what are your thoughts about the future of the strategy and how do you think we could support the adaptation and mitigation to climate change?
Yeah, since climate change can be not addressed by a single person, but we need everybody to help here. I think that one of the biggest advantages of having such a non-native tree species strategy in place and follow their recommendations is that it is an inclusive instrument. It combines the thoughts of and findings of scientists, of practitioners, and involves also the practice, the public. And by doing so, this can be a very successful instrument in order to mitigate climate change.
So thanks again from my side for this nice talk about our strategy. Bye. Thank you very much.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.